The following contains spoilers for Breaking Bad, El Camino, and Better Call Saul. You have been warned. Greetings, fellow mortals. If you had to name Walter White's biggest flaw in Breaking Bad, it would have to be his pride. He exhibits a lot of the deadly sins, but pride stands above all the rest. His desires to be recognized, be in control, and to have people fear him were what led to almost all of the problems in the show, at least with what was involved with him. Jesse made his own fair share of mistakes, and if I were to give Pinkman a sin that personified him at the start, it would be sloth. After all, Jesse mirrored Walter's wasted potential at the beginning of the series. Not to say that Walter didn't show a few of the other 7 deadly sins. Greed comes to mind, for example. At first, his desire for wealth came off as pragmatic. He wanted to take care of his family after his death. As the series continued, however, it was shown that there was no amount of money that would ever truly be enough for Walt. Like I said earlier, that stemmed from more of his pride rather than a desire for monetary objects. In fact, Walter was shown to be content living a simple life while running his drug empire. Of course, Heisenberg proved to be full of wrath and envy as well. It was rare for him to ever let a grudge go. If it ever occurred, I can't think of any event where he was forgiving off the top of my head. The same could be said for his jealousy over people that were more successful than him. And like I said earlier, it wasn't simply monetary either. Walt was even envious of Hank for the adoration that came with being a successful DEA agent. Oddly enough, the sins that were shown the least for Walter proved to be lust and gluttony, mostly because Walt proved to be terrible with women. Skylar was his only outlet for lust, and she wasn't wanting to touch him most of the time. Of course, Walt indulged when she did want to touch him. Sexual gratification was shown to be similar to the high that he got from getting away with illegal activity. In addition, Heisenberg didn't tend to indulge with food or alcohol much either. As always, getting drunk often involved his inflated ego. I suppose that you could say that the high he got off of crushing his enemies could be associated with gluttony, though. While we know what Walter's sins were to a fault, I wanted to take a minute to examine the sins of the characters from Better Call Saul. After all, the events of Better Call Saul were what created the perfect stage for Heisenberg's rise. Jimmy, Mike, Gus, Chuck, Nacho, and even Kim, to some small degree, all played a part to make it possible for Walter to gain power. If not for their decisions and sins, Walter wouldn't have even managed to make it past getting abducted by Tuco in Season 2. And who knows, Hector might have even shut Walter down in Season 1 if he wasn't suffering the consequences of his stroke. To start out with, let's focus on the main character of Better Call Saul. Jimmy McGill's greatest downfall always proved to be his greed, at least when it didn't involve gaining Chuck's approval. Besides his desire for love, what always got Saul into trouble was his desire for wealth. That was demonstrated the most near the end of Season 6, when he went too far with his identity thieving scams. The show even demonstrated the parallel downfall by his decision to get involved with Walter's schemes past getting Badger off the drug-selling charges. Saul wanted wealth and the good things in life. He wanted to be a wolf among the sheep. Now, you could argue that he showed a bit of sloth with his schemes, but that wasn't a problem during the show. If there's 2 things that you can't say about Saul, it's that he's not willing to work hard to get what he wants, or that he has too much pride to make a fool out of himself to achieve his goals. I suppose that leads into Mike. I would argue that Mike's primary sin is something that he shares with Walter. Mike has a strong sense of pride. It comes out in the form of his code. He always follows his self-imposed rules whenever he can. The problem is that his code doesn't follow the law. That was pointed out by Manuel Varga. Despite how much the audience likes Mike and understands him, Manuel was right. It never ends. Gangster justice isn't justice. It's revenge, and it's prideful to think that one's values can be better than the code that all of humanity has agreed upon. Of course, Mike was shown to have his wrathful and greedy sides as well. His anger was demonstrated when he attempted to kill Hector. That wasn't ever going to work out well for him. His greed was also shown when he agreed to work with Walter again in Breaking Bad Season 5, despite the fact that his instincts told him to stay away from Heisenberg. Of course, that had to do with his desire to give money to his granddaughter, so it might come back down to pride. In comparison, Gus isn't shown to be all that prideful in the grand scheme of things. He's willing to bow his head, be humiliated, and even be hurt for the sake of his plans. His motivation always was to get revenge for Max. Gus existed in a stage of constant rage that came out in a never-ending fight against his bosses. The desire to punish the cartel for killing Max drove him to do everything in Better Call Saul and in Breaking Bad. It even bled into his confrontations with Walter. I doubt that Gus's never-ending rage would fade away after he actually got his revenge. It makes me wonder what he would have done if he didn't have Walter to fight with once his battle with the cartel was over. What does the wrathful have once there isn't an outlet for their rage? Gus probably would have just found a new outlet for his pain somewhere, because it was shown at the end of Better Call Saul that he was never going to let himself move on and be happy. The same thing could be said for Chuck. I would say that Chuck's biggest problem was his envy for Jimmy. Saul had a form of charisma that always turned heads. People automatically liked him despite everything that he did. In a way, Chuck's feelings did make sense. Chuck always followed the law to the letter. Instead of looking at what he didn't have, though, Chuck should have looked at his own upsides. He was reliable, dignified, and had a wise intelligence about him. That's why Jimmy looked up to him and wanted to be like him. Like Mike and Walter, Chuck did have a sense of pride. I would argue that it came from his insecurities, though. After all, his own mother called out for Jimmy at the end of her life. That could have been for a wide range of issues. Perhaps she realized that Chuck was the only one there. Perhaps she was worried about the son who isn't reliable. It might be unfair to say that she loved Jimmy more than Chuck. We don't know that. Unfortunately, the squeaky wheel always gets more attention than the one that never has any issues. That leads into Kim. Now, I have already made a full video about her, so I'll try not to repeat myself too much. Her gluttony for the sake of her adrenaline high led to her downfall in every way. Oddly enough, she did come off as the most lustful main character in Better Call Saul as well. Her association with her adrenaline high and Jimmy led to their intimate connection. Of course, it wasn't like Saul was an unwilling participant. I just find it interesting that her sex drive appeared to rely on her addiction to Jimmy's schemes. I suppose that leaves Nacho. Oddly enough, I can't fit any sins to his personality. Perhaps that's another reason why he's the best character in the Breaking Bad universe. Plug for my other video here, by the way. He wasn't too prideful to let his ego get in the way of what would lead to the best possible outcome. No one can claim that he's not willing to work for his goals. Nacho didn't let grudges stop him from working with people who could help him. He never indulged in food, drugs, or alcohol. I can't think of a time where he was even envious of others. Nacho did have women who lived with him in what I assumed was a sexual relationship, but his lust never led to problems in his life. There is a bit of greed in some of his actions, but such feelings immediately fell away for the sake of survival. In the end, it was other people's sins that drove Nacho. Tuco's gluttony, Hector's pride, Gus's wrath. He acted because of those sins, and Nacho's actions were some of the most influential in all of the series. Without Nacho, Walter would have never had a chance. Every vice that Better Call Saul characters indulged in set the stage more and more for Heisenberg. They dug themselves deeper and deeper into their own downfalls. Because that's the overarching morality of the Breaking Bad universe. Even if innocent people suffer because of the terrible actions of criminals, there's a sense of karma in this world. Eventually, bad actions will lead to a hell of one's own making. Every character eventually had to watch everything they valued fall apart. They died knowing that they had failed. Irony seeped into every punishment. Their last thoughts were how their terrible decisions and indulgences led to the worst outcome possible for them. I can only hope that the real world will be like that someday. No one likes to see terrible people get away with hurting others. While not perfect, I try to stay hopeful with the sense of justice that humanity has established, and not personal vendettas or personal values. If there's one thing that the Breaking Bad continuity taught me, is that I need to get over myself a bit. I don't always know what's best. Instead, I need to overcome the vices that will bring me down. I think that we should all strive to be like Nacho's father, because if more people were like him, then things wouldn't end so badly. Of course, a story about a perfectly moral man would be a bit hard to make interesting, but maybe we should accept that life should be a little bit more boring than the stories that we tell each other. Thank you so much for watching. If you like my takes on storytelling, please consider subscribing and liking the video. It would really help me out. Also, remember that I will be self-publishing my novel, Dance of Frozen Death, at the start of 2023. I hope that you will check it out. I appreciate you. Do not despair.